It was a warm afternoon in May, in Washington, D.C., when 27-year-old White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt stepped up to the podium for her routine daily briefing. Known for her provocative statements and combative tone, she had no idea that her next comments would ignite one of the most significant diplomatic controversies of the year. "Speaking of our African partners," she said with a sly grin, raising her fingers in air quotes, "it's fascinating how some countries that can barely keep the lights on want to play a role in international politics." Laughter rippled across the press room. Encouraged by the response, Karoline went further. Take Burkina Faso, for example, a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. What exactly have they contributed to the world besides chaos and poverty? CNN's Sarah Mitchell raised her hand. "Secretary Leavitt, aren't those comments offensive?" Karoline chuckled again. "Offensive? It's just the truth. While they scramble for clean water, we lead the global economy. It's honestly funny when they try to lecture us." Across the Atlantic, in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré was in a meeting with his ministers when his aide, Moussa, rushed into the room. "Mr. President, you need to see this immediately." Moussa connected his tablet to the room's television and played clips from Karoline's press conference. Ibrahim watched in silence, his expression darkening with each word. At 36, he had faced many trials, but rarely had he witnessed such blatant public disrespect. "This woman just insulted 54 countries and 1.4 billion people," said Foreign Minister Dr. Alonso Wedogo. Ibrahim remained composed, but a determined fire sparked in his eyes. "Then she will receive a response worthy of the insult." Within hours of Karoline Leavitt's remarks, outrage spread like wildfire across African social media. In Lagos, students at the University of Lagos organized spontaneous protests. In Accra, Ghanaian, intellectuals published scathing open letters. In Dakar, the Senegalese government summoned the U.S. ambassador for an explanation. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim was fielding call after call from enraged African heads of state. Ghana's president, Nana Akufo-Addo, was direct. "Ibrahim, this insult is unacceptable. We need a united and forceful reply." South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa called next, "Brother, all of Africa is watching you. Your earlier stand against Kamala Harris showed our dignity. Do it again." In Washington, the White House scrambled to contain the fallout. President Trump summoned Karoline for an emergency meeting. "What the hell were you thinking?" Trump snapped, visibly frustrated. "Mr. President, I was just speaking the truth," Karoline replied, trying to defend herself. "Really, you've just alienated an entire continent. We already have enough foreign policy nightmares," Trump shot back. Secretary of State Antony Blinken entered the room with troubling updates. "Mr. President, 3 African nations have canceled diplomatic meetings. Kenya is threatening to renegotiate trade agreements." Back in Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim convened an emergency cabinet meeting. The room was tense. Every minister understood the seriousness of the moment. "Gentlemen," Ibrahim began, "this isn't just a personal attack, it's an assault on the honor of our entire continent." Economic Minister Fatima Sawadogo was visibly upset. "Mr. President, irrelevant. Our economy is growing at 8% annually." Ibrahim gave a cold smile. "Then let's educate her using facts she cannot dismiss." He knew his reply had to be devastating, but measured. Unlike the inexperienced Karoline Leavitt, he had learned that in diplomacy, patience and truth could be more powerful than fury. "I want comprehensive data," he told his ministers. "Economic growth, security, social development, everything." Dr. Wedogo opened his laptop. "Mr. President, since 2022, we've been West Africa's fastest growing economy. And our geopolitical position?" Ibrahim asked. "Strategic," answered Defense Minister Colonel Koulibaly. "We control vital trade routes and our regional stability is internationally acknowledged." Meanwhile, in Washington, Karoline Leavitt was facing the consequences of her words. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. BBC, France 24, Al Jazeera. Demanding a comment, "Karoline, you need to issue a retraction," said her aide, Jennifer Hayes. "A retraction? For telling the truth," Karoline replied, still arrogant. "Social media is exploding. Karoline insults Africa is trending globally," Jennifer insisted. At universities across the U.S., international relations professors used Karoline's gaffe as a case study in diplomatic failure. At Harvard, Professor James Williams told his class, "This young woman just committed one of the most catastrophic diplomatic blunders you'll ever witness in your careers." In Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim sat in his private office with his wife Ijara, carefully preparing his most powerful response yet. "You're about to destroy that girl," Ijara said quietly, knowing what was coming. Her husband, however, responded calmly. "I'm not going to destroy her," Ibrahim said, his tone measured. "I'm going to educate her." "There's a difference," Ijara raised an eyebrow. "And what will your strategy be?" "I'm going to show the world who we truly are with facts, with numbers, and with dignity." Ibrahim immediately called for his communications advisor. "Yakuba, organize an international press conference for tomorrow and Make sure American journalists are present. The morning of May 18, 2025, dawned with a charged atmosphere in Ouagadougou. Journalists from every corner of the globe had arrived in the capital of Burkina Faso, drawn by the anticipation of what was expected to be a historic moment. President Ibrahim Traoré was in his private quarters, dressed in a crisp, navy blue suit that contrasted sharply with his youth and unwavering resolve. At precisely 10 o'clock a.m., local time, the grounds of the presidential palace were surrounded by satellite vans and news crews. CNN, BBC, Fox News, Al Jazeera, the major outlets had shown up. The main press hall had been meticulously arranged. Behind the podium, the flags of Burkina Faso and the African Union stood proudly, projecting not just national pride, but continental dignity. Meanwhile, in Washington, Karoline Leavitt sat in her office, nervously watching the live global broadcasts. For the first time since her remarks, she began to grasp the full scope of the firestorm she had ignited. Madam Secretary, her aide Jennifer said quietly, President Trump wants to see you right after Traoré's press conference. Why? Karoline asked, trying to sound unfazed. Because the entire world is watching and you are at the center of it, Jennifer replied flatly. At around 10 p.m. sharp, Ibrahim Traoré entered the press room. Unlike Karoline's earlier performance marked by arrogance and condescension, Ibrahim walked with the quiet authority of someone who understood his value. The room fell into silence. Ladies and gentlemen of the international press, Ibrahim began, his voice calm yet commanding. Thank you for being in Burkina Faso today. I am here to respond to the statements made by Secretary Karoline Leavitt, who chose to ridicule Africa and mock our nation. He paused deliberately, letting the words settle. Ms. Leavitt, 27 years old, seems to believe that youth and experience are the same thing. Today, I intend to educate her on a few realities she appears to be unaware of. The world was now listening. This was no ordinary response. It was a statement that would echo far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. Ibrahim looked straight into the cameras, knowing full well that his words were reaching Karoline Leavitt in real time. Ms. Leavitt claimed Burkina Faso can barely keep the lights on. Allow me to illuminate that misconception with facts. A screen behind him came to life, displaying powerful statistics and clean, compelling graphics. In the past 3 years, we've increased our national electrical capacity by 340%. Today, 89% of our territory has access to electricity, one of the highest rates in West Africa. In Washington, Karoline felt the first sting. She hadn't done a shred of research before speaking. Ibrahim pressed forward. She also implied, we are economically irrelevant. Burkina Faso is the second largest gold producer in Africa, contributing 15% to the continent's output. Our GDP is growing at a rate of 8.2% per year, more than 3 times the global average. The screen updated with fresh World Bank data to back every claim. You questioned our contribution to the world. Let me clarify. We produce 65% of the world's high-quality cotton. The clothes many of you are wearing likely contain Burkinabe cotton. CNN's Sarah Mitchell scribbled notes, visibly impressed. The BBC's James Richardson whispered to his cameraman, this man is delivering a map. Added with a composed smile, geography also appears to be a challenge for Ms. Leavitt. She claimed Americans couldn't locate Burkina Faso on a map. Perhaps she should consult one before speaking about nations she clearly doesn't understand. It was a jab, sharp but dignified. In Washington, Karoline turned visibly pale. You're 27 and already the White House press secretary. That's commendable, Ibrahim said smoothly. I'm 36 and have led my nation for 3 years. Maybe age isn't the issue, it's preparation. And respect at the White House. Trump muttered under his breath. He's destroying her with manners. But Ibrahim wasn't done. She spoke of us fighting over clean water. Today, 94% of our population has access to safe, clean drinking water thanks to smart investments. Investments we prioritized instead of spending trillions on wars we didn't need. He took a sip of water, pausing, letting the tension in the room peak. Back in Washington, Karoline was visibly shaken. She had completely underestimated her opponent. Ms. Leavitt asked what we contribute to the world beyond instability and poverty. Ibrahim said, his tone respectful but unrelenting. Let me educate her on that instability. Behind him, regional security maps appeared. Burkina Faso has reduced terrorist attacks within our borders by 71% over the past 2 years. We are now the safest country in the Sahel. Our neighboring nations consult us on security strategies. The ambassador of Mali, seated near the front, nodded in silent agreement. As for poverty, Ibrahim continued with calm precision. In just 3 years, we have reduced extreme poverty from 47% to 23% of our population. We've created 2.3 million jobs. Our middle class has expanded by 89%. At universities across the United States, professors paused their lectures to stream the press conference. At Columbia University, Professor Michael Davis told his students, "You're witnessing a masterclass in assertive diplomacy." Ibrahim didn't shy away from pointed critiques of the United States. You speak of American economic leadership, and it's truth the United States leads in national debt, $33 trillion. Burkina Faso, meanwhile, has maintained a fiscal surplus for 2 consecutive years. A hush fell over the hall. The comparison was brutal. He laughed at the idea of Africans giving lessons to Americans. Ibrahim said, "So allow me to offer a free one. Respect is earned through knowledge, not through arrogance." Back in Washington, Karoline Leavitt was being flooded with urgent messages from her staff. Social media had erupted. The hashtag #MeetCarolineEducated was spreading like wildfire. Ibrahim continued, "Burkina Faso has the youngest population in the world. 67% of our people are under 25. They are engineers, doctors, and scientists educated in our universities. And frankly, Ms. Leavitt, many of them could teach you something about humility." At that moment, President Trump summoned Karoline to the Oval Office. The situation had spun out of control, and urgent damage control was required. Inside the Oval Office, Karoline walked into a room filled with grim-faced aides and a furious president. "Karoline, you just triggered the biggest diplomatic disaster of my presidency," Trump barked, slamming his fist on the table. "Mr. President, I didn't know," Karoline began, but Trump cut her off. "That's the problem. You didn't know. You didn't research. You spoke without understanding." Secretary of State Antony Blinken held up a tablet. "Mr. President, 8 African countries have canceled diplomatic meetings in the last 2 hours. The African Union is considering sanctions." Meanwhile, on social media, #CarolineEducated was trending worldwide. Millions of posts mocked her ignorant comments. Memes flooded Twitter and Instagram, contrasting her 27 years of inexperience with Ibrahim's 36 years of leadership. On CNN, political analyst Jake Morrison commented, "Rarely have we seen a global figure corrected so thoroughly and so respectfully. Late-night shows seized the moment." Stephen Colbert joked, "Looks like our press secretary confused a diplomatic briefing with an open mic." Roast Burkina Faso edition. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim was meeting with African ambassadors who had flown in to show solidarity. President Traoré said the Nigerian ambassador, "Your response was perfect. You uplifted the dignity of our entire continent." But Ibrahim remained humble. "It was never about humiliation." He replied, "It was about education and defending our shared dignity." Back in the U.S., online petitions demanding Karoline Leavitt's resignation quickly amassed millions of signatures. African students at American universities organized peaceful protests, holding signs quoting Ibrahim's speech. Trump, now fully aware of the political fallout, privately admitted to his inner circle, "She has to go. I'm not going to lose an entire continent over the ignorance of a 27-year-old press secretary." 3 days after Ibrahim's devastating address, the pressure on Karoline had become unbearable. Protests outside the White House persisted. Editorials in major U.S. newspapers were blistering. The Washington Post ran the headline, "Leavitt's diplomatic ignorance damages U.S.-Africa relations." The New York Times was even more blunt, "When inexperience meets arrogance, the Leavitt disaster." Under mounting pressure from moderate Republicans nervous about the upcoming midterm elections, Trump summoned Karoline for one final meeting. "You've got 2 choices," he said coldly. "Resign with dignity, or I'll fire you publicly." "Mr. President, I can fix this," Karoline pleaded. "How?" Trump shot back. "The president of Burkina Faso just gave you an intellectual beating in front of the whole world. You've become an international joke." Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim began receiving invitations to speak at American universities, Harvard, Yale, Stanford. They all wanted to hear from the man who had corrected Washington with elegance. Dr. Ouagadougou smiled at the irony. "She tried to belittle us and, instead, she raised our global standing." Ibrahim accepted some of the invitations. "It's not about revenge," he said. "It's about showing that Africa has voices worthy of global respect." On the afternoon of May 22nd, Karoline Leavitt submitted her resignation. In her letter to the press, she wrote, "I acknowledge that my statements were inappropriate and harmed critical U.S. diplomatic relationships." She never mentioned Ibrahim Traoré by name. Ibrahim's response had an immediate impact. Across African social media, reactions poured in not with mockery, but with quiet satisfaction. "This isn't about celebrating someone's downfall." One post read, "It's about justice being served." True to his composed nature, Ibrahim issued a formal statement. "I regret that Ms. Leavitt lost her position," he said. "I only hope this experience has taught her the value of mutual respect." His words were praised globally as a model of grace and leadership. Even in victory, Ibrahim Traoré upheld the same dignity that had defined his entire response, offering humility in contrast to the arrogance that had started it all. 2 weeks after Karoline Leavitt's resignation, the diplomatic landscape had changed dramatically. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, Ibrahim stood at a podium at Harvard University, addressing a packed auditorium of over 2,000 students and faculty. His lecture, titled Modern Diplomacy, The Power of Respect, ended with a standing ovation. Modern diplomacy, Ibrahim said, demands preparation, respect, and humility. When these are absent, the result is global embarrassment. In the front row, African students at Harvard sat with pride written across their faces. Maria Dio, a Ghanaian student, later shared, "To see a young African leader treated with such respect here, it's deeply inspiring." The ripple effect of Karoline's education was evident. Empowered by how Ibrahim had defended Africa, with composure and facts, other African nations began adopting more assertive positions toward Western powers. Kenya renegotiated its trade terms with France. Nigeria, followed by revising agreements with the United Kingdom. Ibrahim has unintentionally ignited a movement of African self-assertion, observed Professor James Richardson of the London School of Economics. In Washington, President Trump appointed a new press secretary, Marcus Thompson, a seasoned 45-year-old diplomat. His first statement was pointed and deliberate. The United States deeply values its partnerships across Africa and recognizes the emerging leadership of nations like Burkina Faso. It was a clear, strategic acknowledgement of Ibrahim's rising prestige. Global investors took note. Encouraged by Ibrahim's data-driven leadership and international stature, foreign investment in Burkina Faso surged $8 billion in just 1 month. "Who would have thought that defending our dignity could be so profitable?" joked Dr. Arago to Ibrahim. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt attempted to rebuild her image. She wrote reflective articles titled Lessons Learned, but her credibility was severely damaged. She will be remembered not for diplomacy, a CNN analyst noted, but as a case study in how not to practice it. Ibrahim, on the other hand, was in high demand. President Emmanuel Macron invited him for an official visit to France. Canada's Prime Minister proposed a strategic partnership. Even China expressed interest in expanding cooperation with Burkina Faso. 6 months after the now famous incident coined, the education of Karoline Ibrahim Traoré had become one of the most respected voices in global diplomacy. From his office in Ouagadougou, he was preparing for his second address to the United Nations General Assembly. "Who would have thought that responding to an arrogant young woman would make me a global figure?" he said to his wife with a soft smile. "It wasn't what you said that made you respected," she replied. "It was how you said it with intelligence, dignity, and facts." The impact on Burkina Faso was extraordinary. The country's GDP had grown by 12% in the first half of the year, making it the fastest growing economy in Africa. 3 new universities had opened. The Human Development Index ranking jumped 23 places. The Karoline episode became required study at top diplomacy schools. At Georgetown University, Professor David Miller told his students, "The Leavitt Traoré case proves that preparation always beats arrogance." At 28, Karoline had vanished from public life. Her attempts at a comeback were unsuccessful. Her final interview, 6 months later, was somber. "I learned the hard way that words carry weight," she admitted. "Ibrahim Traoré taught me humility." Ibrahim, magnanimous even in victory, told the BBC, "I hope she truly learned something. Everyone deserves a second chance if their regret is sincere." In December 2025, Time magazine named Ibrahim Traoré its Person of the Year. The cover featured his portrait with the headline, "The Young Man Who Educated the World." In the feature interview, Ibrahim reflected, "I never wanted to be famous for confronting anyone. I wanted to be known for building my nation, but sometimes, defending dignity becomes part of that journey." On the evening of his 37th birthday, Ibrahim walked through the gardens of the presidential palace with his family. The lights of Ouagadougou sparkled in the distance, no longer just the capital of Burkina Faso, but a symbol of African pride. "Daddy," his daughter asked, "are you famous all over the world?" Ibrahim smiled gently. "No, my dear, I just defended our home." The world noticed because it needed an example of dignity. Ibrahim Traoré's powerful, elegant response may have stunned Karoline Leavitt, but more importantly, it reminded the world that the new Africa will not tolerate disrespect. And it showed, once and for all, that preparation, truth, and dignity will always triumph over arrogance and ignorance.